and welcome to another episode of Love Selling, Hate Sales. Today I am joined by AJ Alonzo, who's the Director of Marketing at demandDrive. AJ, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to talking, about how much I love sales but hate selling. No, I'm kidding.
Hey, wait a minute. That's my line. Awesome. Well, listen, I know you are an expert in the SDR function, which I think gets a lot of heat in the social medias these days, especially on LinkedIn. Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's just so many people have such polarized opinions about it. So we're going to kick off with one of my polarized opinions about it, and I'm going to let you tell me what you think, right? My biggest fundamental problem with the SDR function is that you're asking the people with the least experience to call on people with the most experience. Mm-hmm. And that's it.
And,
Come at me.
You're right. Like it is a problem in a lot of organizations because I think you're right. You have the most juniored person fresh out of college. You give them like a week of sales training and you say, hey, go call CROs and pitch our product.
Okay, sure.
And like 4 to 5 years ago, it worked, which is crazy to think about, that you could have someone with minimal experience, minimal understanding of how you really help somebody and convince someone of that stature to take a meeting. It was just a volume-based approach. And
so before you go too much further into that, it worked. Like, let's even pause on it worked. Yeah. What worked?
The volume-based approach of just getting butts in seats, people in the door, at least starting that conversation and educating maybe a portion of your audience that didn't know you existed.
Okay, so it was an awareness. It was an awareness play. It was set a demo for an AE, maybe, or a meeting for an AE.
Exactly.
That was success definition there.
Some type of, I'm educating a person who didn't know we existed before, that we do exist and we can solve some of their problems. But that education portion was left to the AE, the closing rep. The SDR was just bridging that introduction. Now, that's not, I guess, expected anymore. Okay. And what I see a lot of is SDRs that take that next step, and they are doing more of the education around not feature function, but hey, this is how I think we can help you, right? Like, I am more of a subject matter expertise on what I do. You know what you do. Let's meet somewhere in the middle. I think we can help you with this. Please confirm my hypothesis.
How did that happen?
How did that happen?
Yeah, how did that evolution happen?
I think buyers are way more empowered than they ever have been.
Got it.
Think about it like this. So I just bought a car.
Yeah.
And I did an inordinate amount. I'm a research guy. I look up everything beforehand. I spent hours and hours on Toyota's website looking up cars. I used to have a RAV4. Okay. Do I want another RAV4? Do I need to upgrade to a Highlander? Who knows? So I do all this research online.
You need a Land Cruiser.
I got a RAV4. Spoiler alert. Damn it. So I go into the dealership and I tell them, hey, I'm looking at a Toyota RAV4. Yeah. Great. So they show me a RAV4. If I go into a dealership and I'm looking for a RAV4 and they show me a Land Cruiser, I'm going to be like, I just did all this research and I came to the conclusion that I wanted a RAV4 and you're not showing me that.
Right.
So I think buyers, to that analogy, they're doing a lot of research on their own, right?
Right.
If I want a sales engagement platform, I'm going to go online and I'm going to look up Outreach, First Sales Law, First Groove. I'm going to do all that by myself.
Right.
So that when I've in some capacity indicated, hey, I want to have a conversation, SDRs aren't starting from they shouldn't be starting from stage 0. Right. They're not coming at me with all this education-based content. It's like, you're here for a reason. How do I convince you that we're the right choice for you? How do I confirm that hypothesis? So the fact that buyers have all of this information at their fingertips, so they can go out there and do this research, and they're coming in with more information at their disposal, means that SDRs have to elevate themselves beyond that just, I'm here to make you aware that we exist. We already know you exist. Okay. How can you convince me that I've made the right decision by talking to you?
Now, there's a lot of underlying subtlety to your example there. That we
Very
might
biased,
have to
I'll say that.
That we might have to dig into a little bit, right? So you going into the car dealership feels like an inbound
100%,
function, right? Education awareness in an outbound function is a little bit of a different thing. So there's a couple things there, but let's maybe even look at the inbound function, right? Going back to your walking into the car dealership with your research in your noggin. What's your expectation of that sales rep?
For me, the buyer?
Yeah, for you, the buyer.
Yeah, I expect them to if I go in and I ask, or if they know that I'm looking for something, I expect them to internalize that and focus the conversation on, like I kind of alluded to before, confirming my hypothesis, like digging into, okay, why do you think you want the REV4? Let's go through some of the specifications in the car that you thought you were looking for, or what you expect to get out of the vehicle. What is your, outside of like the features of the car, what are you going to use it for? Yeah. And then using that to then frame it against, okay, well, the Highlander or the Land Cruiser also does this. Why have you not considered that car? So working with me, listening to why I've made this decision, and then internalizing that and being able to tell stories about other customers like me, being able to talk through the value propositions and value adds that I've been able to provide other customers, and sort of weaving that into, okay, well, you've made this hypothesis, let's confirm or deny it.
So what's really interesting about that is you didn't say, walk me over to the RAV4.
Yeah, I guess I'm in this situation. I'm trying to analogize it to a sales. Like, I'm not going to have someone walk me to outreach.
I know you are, but as young sellers that are selling a product, I do think that there's this instant, like, let me show you.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, I have 3 slides I can show you. Do you mind if I pull them up?
Right. So, we're using this RAV4 analogy. I like that you, as a buyer, want them to validate a few things before they just show you the RAV4. Because, if you walk me out and show me a stripped down RAV4, I'm gonna be like, dude, F off, man. Where's the platinum edition? Right? Like, so that, like, you got to know your buyer a little bit. Just like, and same thing, like, you're going to show me your outreach demo. You may only care about this one thing that really is, instead of the spray, like, here's the 45-minute demo. You might be able to get it done in 5 minutes if you're really pointed by asking some good questions. Yeah.
And I think that a lot of, going back to the original point, like, SDRs used to not do that, right? There was no question asking, no real qualification. It was just, you're a director at a company that we want to talk to, bang, like, let's get a meeting on the books. Yeah. Now it's like, listen, I've talked to people like you. There's one particular instance of our technology that directors at companies of your size find really valuable. Is that the case with you? Right. And if that's not true, then do some more discovery. If it is true, bang, that's a good focal point for you. That discovery portion is so crucial, and I think now, over the past couple of years, it's getting recognized as a vital part of the SDR function that was just totally overlooked previously.
Right. So we're gonna try to weave another analogy into this whole funness. We'll see if it lands. It may not, but so we talked about inbound, right? Walking into the car dealership, and we're gonna go into the restaurant industry now, right? There's the server and there's the bartender, right? In my mind, the bartender always has the power. They're like the cool person in the restaurant because everyone comes to them, right? So the inbound leads come to the bartender, like, hey man, can I get a drink? Yeah, man, I'll do whatever I'm gonna do. But as a server, you have to go to them, right? They get seated, but it's your job to go to them and kind of like, hey, I'm here to serve you. Our specials today are X, Y, and Z. So this is a little bit more of the outbound, right? No one likes the server as much as they like the bartender. The bartender's cool, the server's not as cool. So in an outbound SDR role, that's to me where that experience even becomes, the value of that experience becomes even wider. The chasm gets even bigger because now you're blind calling a CRO, to use your example, and you're trying to have a business. Everyone says, like, the blanket advice is have business conversations. Well, what the fuck does that mean?
Yeah, man? I'm just going to talk about golf.
Right. Like, what does that mean? So, like, help me understand, like, how do we get better at that?
I think if I'm the server in this analogy and I see a family come in or someone come in and they sit down at a table, there's like classic sales tropes where you can look at someone and like if you go into someone's office, you see pictures on the wall or something in the corner like a trinket, and you can use that to personalize how you approach that person, right?
Yeah,
like
for sure.
You can see a family come in and see that there's 2 rambunctious kids, and you can go ahead and make the assumption that like, these kids are probably rambunctious. They're going to want kids menus. Let me go ahead and see if that's the case with the parents at the table.
Bring the crayons.
Yeah. the dough that they can play with at a pizza restaurant.
There you go.
Same situation with SDRs who are reaching out. You have to understand like why you're reaching out to somebody. There's an inherent like eyeball test that you can do when you look at someone's title, the company that they work at, some basic information about that organization to really understand and like piece together, why would this person want to talk with me? What value can I bring them? Honestly, like, am I worth their time, basically?
Right.
Not that degrading, but thinking
I
from
like that,
the seat of the CRO, like, is this
Yeah.
person even worth my time? If you don't know that, don't reach out to them, because then you are going to have that generic business conversation, probably not going to land. You might capture someone who's in market, but like 1 to 2% of the time. I think SDRs need to have that knowledge in the back of their mind. Like, this person looks like someone we've worked with. The persona falls into this area that we know we play really well in. There has to be some actual impetus for you to reach out to this person other than, well, they're a CRO who attended an event, they're on a list, and I was told to call down.
Okay, so this is good. So pre-show, we talked a little bit about the sweet spot for your business, right? And it's helping the SDR function a lot of times in that Series A where it needs to get serious, right? We've identified what our customers look like. We've proven that we can acquire them in some sort of repeatable way. Now we need to throw fuel to the fire. So how, to that founder who's deciding to spin up an SDR function and get serious, how do you describe the function to them?
That's a really good question. More so than just like, because if you tell someone, hey, let's build you an SDR function, I think the basic notion, the preconceived notion that you have is, oh, you're just going to have like sales admins try to book appointments for my AEs, right? Why not just hire more AEs? Right. I think the way that we would spin it up is, okay, well, not only are you getting someone to confirm some hypotheses that you have in terms of you've been able to land customers in a repeatable enough fashion. How do we scale that out? You're able to do that, but you're also able to then test the market with new messaging. You're able to understand more about your competitors. You're able to determine whether or not the value propositions that you've developed actually land with all of the different personas that you've built. The SDR function, more so than just a calling or emailing group, is an experimental group. They're able to bring back the feedback that they're getting from the front lines to make, honestly, like business decisions. You can change your product based on what SDRs are hearing. If you hear it enough and you're noticing that it's a trend, then it's a group that you should probably listen to, because they're talking to your potential customers way more than theoretically you are, more so than marketing able to leverage research reports or surveys or whatever it is. These are actual people that could buy your product telling you whether or not they thought your messaging was good, or what they know about your competitors, or what their buying cycles look like. All of that is incredibly valuable information for you to take back and influence your own product and how you go to market. So
what I find fascinating about your response is I didn't hear leads once.
I think that was the given, right? Like, not only are you having a group of people that do, I guess it's not a given if you're really bad
but you
SDRs.
Know how, I mean, you work with founder CEOs, right? Like, just show me the leads, man. Like, where are my leads? Fill my pipeline.
Right. Yeah, right? That is a very common answer.
Right. Well, everything you said has inherent value in my world, right? It all makes sense to me. But how do you model out that ROI, right? There is kind of that concept of pipeline building, lead generation, but I love the idea of testing hypotheses and doing experiments and things like that. But at some point they're going to say, what's the time to value? What's the ROI and this type of thing? So
a hypothesis isn't a number.
Right. How do you frame that up? What's the best formula you've seen?
Formula wise, I mean, I tend to look, we work backwards, right? So if someone comes to us and they're like, look, we know that we need 4 closed-won deals this quarter to make the investment worth it. So how do we work backwards from there based on conversion rates and stuff? And that's basic backwards waterfalling. I think anyone who's in sales leadership can understand that. Sure. I think where the formula gets enhanced by the SDR function is changing those conversion rates, so that when you look at like, hey, you've built an SDR function out that can better go to market, you can reach more people, you can reach more of the right people, then that conversion rate from that cold lead to an SAL or SQL, however you're going to define it at your organization, goes up, which means that your opportunity rate goes up, which means that your close rate ends up going up. that's where I think if you build out the SDR function properly to really make sure that you're qualifying people, you're bringing in the right people into your funnel, and you're not just sending tire kickers over to AEs, that's where you see a lot of the value in those conversion rates and how they increase and impact your overall close one revenue.
I'm curious because you talked about working backwards on the napkin in terms of, well, 4 deals pays for the service, right? Or pays for whatever it is
Very
you're doing.
basically, yeah.
Right. How often are you dealing with that mentality versus our board wants us to triple revenue this year?
Yeah.
We don't have the full playbook. How can you fit into that, right? Like, which one are you dealing with more often? Is it a different story you're telling? How does that work?
It's the former more often, but we've definitely dealt with. So I think a lot of times when we're talking with like a director of sales, for example, a VP of sales, they've in some capacity translated what is expected of them from a board into more tangible, like, well, this is what we're looking for, right? Like, I want this output. We have dealt with situations where it's like, we're expected to increase our valuation from 10 to 50 million. What do we do to get there? And that is a lot more ethereal and difficult to imagine, but we still try to stake in some type of, okay, well, if you want to get from 10 to 50, what does that mean for the total number of like customers that you're bringing in? How many net new logos is that, roughly based on your ACV? Okay, now we know how many new logos it is. Say it's 100 new logos. Great. What do your close rates look like today? Okay, we can start kind of figuring out, based on these lofty expectations that have been put in front of you by a board of directors, how possible is it for you to get there? Do you need to increase the number of salespeople that you have by 30 to even come close to that number? Going back to a board and saying, like, this is impossible is a difficult thing to do, but it's a lot easier when you're like, look, the numbers show that we need to increase the number of salespeople by 30 to get there.
Right.
Then it's like, let's have a more, structured or even-keeled discussion about the possibility of raising our valuation to that point based on just, the sales and marketing perspective.
Yeah. So, all that's well and good. It's all a math problem at that point, right? And you can get people to buy into a math problem to a certain extent. Yeah. I don't believe sales is as simple as inputs and outputs, no matter what part of the function you live in. So talk to me about, the old 5 years ago, you said we could get away with making calls, creating awareness, setting a meeting. Today, that expectation doesn't work. So what does education and training and onboarding and ramping for an SDR look like today in doing it right?
I think it's longer than what people expect it to be. I might date myself on the podcast, but I saw this today on LinkedIn. Somebody posted a picture. It was of a person with a fire hose just blasting in their face. And they were like, it's a real life example of an SDR after their first week of training, right?
Totally.
You expect someone, to your point at the beginning, the most juniored, inexperienced individual at your company to just take 100% of the subject matter expertise and customer stories and SDR 101 stuff, and in a week just go and hit the phones and be successful. I think it's just unrealistic to expect that at this point. And the best companies that we work with and what we do internally is making sure that the onboarding process has sort of like a defined 2-week, like, this is your training section. Sure, these are all the things that you should know, but it's a continuous coaching and development program beyond that a lot of companies don't necessarily invest in for a number of different reasons, that really makes sure and ensures that, like, the SDRs that you bring on after those first 30 days aren't just going to drop off. They're getting the support that they need from a training individual, from an onboarding individual, from a director level and a leadership level, to ensure that they are actually doing the things that you want them to do, that they're showing the skills that you've built or attempted to build during their training section, and that they're seeing the results that they should be seeing after certain daily benchmarks. I think a lot of people look at the SDR function and they don't invest in that section because they're like, well, it's a volatile position, right? This person could leave in 6 months and I've invested a ton of time and energy into them and they're gone. Then I have to start all over again. And more often than not, people leave because you haven't invested in them. So it's a bit of like a self-fulfilling prophecy where, if I'm not going to invest in them, they won't stay. But if you're not investing in them, then they won't stay. So if you do, maybe they will. Yeah. I wonder, when you talk about the 2 weeks of this and then you've got this period and the ongoing coaching, again, going back to the idea of have business conversations, how much are we teaching
about the business that they're in, that they're selling into versus the product that they're selling. I mean, what I mean by that is, give me the download on the ideal customer profile. Why are they the ideal customer profile? First of all, why is it made up the way it's made up? And why did we identify this as product market fit? Right? What itch were we scratching when we created this product? Right?
Yeah.
That type of thing. So how deep do you feel you go there versus just product onboarding? Because I think the product is less important than the ability to understand the market and the market dynamics.
You're 100% right. And I think you have to have a base understanding of like what you do, right? Like if I'm selling a software and I don't know what the software does, I'm going to look like a fool on all the calls. So at least some base level idea. But I do think, I don't have a direct split. I would say probably 70-30 in terms of like the itch you wanted to scratch. The 70% of that should be customer stories. It should be really understanding like, why do we exist? What void do we fill? What are customers getting from us? Listening to customer calls, listening to the customer success team as to why people keep expanding or upping their contract, like stuff like that. 70%, 30% for, you know, what do we actually do as a company? What does my product actually look like? I think if we focus a lot more on that 70% and really push more of our eggs into that basket, then you're getting reps who you could theoretically like put them into almost any situation and they'll be able to understand based on what they've learned about your company. If they move to a new company, they'll understand how to tease out the most valuable information. What do people actually want to hear about on the phone? They want to hear about how customers are succeeding with their product, about how they're overcoming challenges that maybe they don't even know they have. That's the I'm trying to think of the analogy. It's where it's just what people want to hear. It's no one cares about you or your product. They care about how you can help them.
Yeah, I'm super encouraged to hear that you've got that 70-30 split, and we are teaching people the business side of it and really what people want to hear, what matters. So if you take that a step further and we think about the SDR function and the perceptions of it, at least in my mind, and I know a lot of sales leadership and people who might be hiring SDR for the first time, is just this volume game, right? Of just more activity. Does that shift in upfront training then lead to a shift in expectations in terms of focus on quality versus just making 100 dials and sending 5,000 emails?
It should, right? Like you should, if you're preaching all of this stuff around quality, around personalization, around research, around making sure that you get the right people in the funnel, and then you still say, okay, well, bang the phones and give me 100 dials today. You're like telling reps that you want one thing, but then actually getting them to do another. And I think a lot of it goes back to how we hire SDRs, because more often than not, companies are saying that they want critical thinkers, they want empathy, they want reps who are creative and curious, and they have this growth mindset. And then they go out and they look for resilient SDRs who can make 100 dials a day and have a super thick skin, and they're hyper competitive. They're not saying that those are mutually exclusive. Those qualities can exist in the same person, but more often than not, they don't. And the competitive grit level qualities overemphasized more so than the empathy or critical thinking qualities. So you bring an SDR in and you're like, think critically, be empathetic, and they're like, okay, but I was hired to make like 100 dials a day.
For that.
Like what are you doing here? So I do think that the expectation has to change. It starts with how we hire SDRs, but you can also help by providing and supporting SDRs with basic account tiering, in my opinion. Something that I, as an SDR, used successfully, and something we teach today is making sure that, like, you know, you have enough target accounts to make sure you're doing the right work on, but you also have enough not target accounts, sort of those reservoir lists, that you can do a more volume-based approach. So you get a little bit of the best of both worlds, but you at least get your SDRs to focus on the accounts that matter and putting the most time into those, but also being able to have a volume-based approach when needed. The two can live together. There's always this quality versus quantity debate. They don't have to. They can coexist, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I like that.
You just need to know how to budget your time and the energy and effort of your SDR to hit both.
Got it. So do you think the hiring disconnect is a function of, as the profession has matured, the perception of it hasn't?
That's a really good way to put it. I think that, and not so subtle plug for my show, Unsubscribe,
please.
the demandDrive podcast. We actually just had someone on who talked about, it was funny. He was an SDR, rose up the ranks to an AE, director of sales, VP of sales, but he always looked at his time as an SDR as like, yeah, it was just like an SDR. All of us were SDRs at one point if we're VPs of sales. But he didn't look at it as like a proper job. The way that he described it was like, now SDRs are like a proper job. I'm like, what do you mean proper? Like, you get paid for it. It's still That's a job. Hilarious. But he's right? Like the way that a lot of companies look at the SDR is you are a bottom of the totem pole type role.
Right.
You're there just to fill in the activities that we need, and you don't have much else to contribute to the organization outside of that. And a lot of companies are shifting that mentality. There is a bigger emphasis on like the SDRs matter movement, and I am fully behind it.
Sure.
But there is a large perception of people that look at the role as that bottom of the totem pole type thing. So when you're hiring for it, that's what you kind of navigate and gravitate towards versus the more strategic, critical thinking, empathic SDR that a lot of companies look for and want these days.
So we talked at the top of the show a little bit about just the heat that the SDR function is taking, social in general, things like that. What is your response to, we need to reverse track on the specialization concept of Aaron Ross, right? And we need to go back to full cycle selling and not have this specialized SDR, AE, CS, handoff, it's bad experience, that type of thing. How do you view that?
I think it depends on the industry, the company that you're at. Like, there's definitely some organizations that you don't need an SDR. Like if you sell a transactional product and you can get someone to just give you a credit card over the phone, I don't really think that, like, you totally depends on the organization, but like SDRs might not be the best fit for you.
Right.
I think you have to look at what you're expecting of your sales team, what your overall kind of like goals are, success metrics, what those look like, and then trying to understand whether or not you can invest in a higher paid full cycle sales rep and bringing more of those people on to hit the goals that you have, or if it makes sense to supplement that with a well built out SDR function, which is cheaper than bringing on AEs, but still provides you the opportunity to not only fill up your funnel, but also do a lot of the other stuff that I talked about before in terms of confirming hypotheses, changing your go-to-market strategy. Like, do you need SDRs? Does anyone need SDRs? No, you need a salesperson. But if you want to mature your organization in a way that allows you to scale faster or grow in different directions, I think the SDR function is the best group to help you do that.
Very cool. So I'm curious, we talked a little bit about, the early stage companies adding an SDR function for possibly the first time, scaling. What are your views on the SDR function in the enterprise? How should it function? Where does it work well? Where does it not work? How is the job different even?
It is very different. I think within enterprise accounts, there are like tons and tons of stakeholders, right? You sometimes have 30 people who are making a collective decision to end up working with you, whereas SDRs might work with 2 people. So there's a lot of the way that the SDRs kind of approach the role, and I think that they're actually very well equipped to do so in terms of mapping out accounts, understanding hierarchies, and doing that sort of sale work. That has typically been what SDRs are built to do anyways. So within enterprise level organizations, when you are selling to a ton of different stakeholders and the ACVs are millions and millions of dollars, you want to make sure that you're building up enough champions within that organization to go to bat for you. And the SDR is fantastic at doing that, right? They're able to understand what Bob in accounting and Lisa in finance want, that maybe it's easier to do on 2 separate calls than have one AE try to get both of them on a call and go through all that stuff. If you can do all that beforehand with the SDR function and make sure that those notes are properly handed over to the AE and that handover process looks good, which is a whole separate topic, then they're way more equipped to make sure that that deal is in a good place rather than trying to kind of do it all themselves.
Got it. Yeah, because I feel like in the enterprise, the AE's role as a quarterback oftentimes is to gather what they need to tell the story, right? They're trying to, at the highest level, come up with this use your term earlier, this hypothesis that this is what's going to transform your business, right? If you're doing an enterprise deal that's in the millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, it's going to be transformational at some level, right? So you need inputs from across the business in order to back that story up or back that hypothesis up.
Exactly.
Sounds like what you're saying is the SDR function is feeding those inputs, right?
They
feeding
should
back.
be, yeah. That should be like, if you look at an organization, you're selling into like an Oracle or a Salesforce, some huge company, and you're trying to build this hypothesis, wouldn't it be a lot easier for you to build it based off of conversational data that someone has gathered for you,
right,
or based on stuff that you read online that you've had to comb through on your own?
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. So, I talk about this from a account executive perspective a bit on the show, which is the graduation path. There's obviously that natural graduation from SDR to AE. And I think we see, you even described it, you had a person, SDR, AE, frontline manager, VP of sales, that type of thing.
Right.
I don't think that's the path for everybody.
Wasn't for me.
Right. Yeah. So how can we keep people excited about the profession that don't see that like path that's just put in front of them? Like for me, I tried being a VP of sales. I wasn't very good at it. I didn't like it, right? But being an individual contributor and doing it differently, going up market, going to the enterprise, that's reinvigorated how I think about the role. How can you think about that in the SDR function? Is it just, hey, I got to get out of being an SDR as quick as possible and be an AE? That's what I feel like it is, but what's different? How can we make it more sexy?
I think a lot of companies do that, right? They try to push SDRs out because AEs, technically, if you look at them, they're probably more valuable to your organization in the long run in terms of what they can contribute. So people do push reps out of the role. But I think I'm of the firm belief, and it's because I was an SDR for like 2.5-ish plus years, that I learned a ton of foundational just business skills that I think if I graduated out of the role in 9 months, I wouldn't have. And for me in marketing, a lot of the stuff that I do today, it helps that like I work at an organization that deals directly with sales development, and I market that because I was an SDR. Like it's obviously very easy for me, but I think that there's a lot of just general things that I wouldn't be able to even like wrap my head around if I didn't have the experience that I did as an SDR. And I know the tenure at this point is like probably 14-ish months last I checked for an SDR, which is like, it's not bad. Like if you can last in the role for that long, you learn a ton about the industry that you're in. You learn a ton about the biggest players in the industry and this sort of ICP that you've developed. There's a lot that you can, on a day-to-day basis, you kind of don't pick up on as an SDR that really help formulate a lot of what you could be doing in the future. I do think that the role is still a stepping stone role. Right. But I don't think that it's necessarily just automatically a stepping stone deeper into sales. You can leverage it into marketing, customer success, sales leadership. There's a ton of different ways for you to use the skills that you've built up as an SDR to help further your career. But I don't think that you should expect to stay an SDR for like 12 years, right? Like that's...
Love that.
You could. I've seen people do it. They can really specialize and focus. Like if they're really good at prospecting and building pipeline, that's gold for an organization. Right. Everybody wants a top tier prospector to just keep pushing pipeline to their salespeople, right? Totally. But like you said, it can get stale. If you can last that long, you can build up a ton of skill. You can gain some serious credibility, and you can be a very integral part to your company as that role. But more than likely, you'll exhaust all of the growth that you can do after like probably 3 years. Yeah. So if you want to be able to stick it out for an extended period of time, you can. But more often than not, you'll be able to take the stuff that you did learn and try something else. Try marketing. Try customer success. Try leadership. Yeah. I'm trying to think. There's a bunch of different ways that you can take it.
Yeah, I love those tentacles. That's great.
Yeah. So that's a good way to put it. Tentacles. Oh man, I love that.
Yeah, no, I dig it. I think it's great to have, different paths that people should be able to think about, right? And think about their career in different ways. Because, if you think about the profile of a young person, it's coming out and this being a first job in a lot of cases, not always, but in a lot of cases, it's good to know that it has those branches that you can go off into and potentially open other doors. There's not just
one path that you're expected to go down. Like, you've signed yourself up for the rest of your career by accepting this job. That's absolutely not the case.
Exactly right. So give people some benchmarks. Like, what should expectations be in terms of entry-level SDR? What kind of money could they expect to make if you're a freaking, baller and you're awesome at it and you're, towards the latter part of graduation? What's the high end look like? What do some of those benchmarks look like for the SDR?
It's a good question. Numbers that I haven't looked at in a little while now, I will fully admit to you. But I know that if you're coming like right out of college, you can't expect to be blown away by a salary, right? Like, unfortunately, the SDR position is still very entry level, very low on the totem pole at a lot of organizations. So they often talk about uncapped OTE. You could expect to make, like, depending on where you live, anywhere from like $45,000 to $60,000 a year in base salary. But like, really, it's kind of up to you in terms of how much you actually do make based on your comp structure. If it is just based on the amount of meetings that you book, or if it's based on the amount of opportunities you create, and you have some type of kickback for closed won stuff, like you can make a ton of money as an SDR. We've had reps internally that have made over $100,000 a year as an SDR.
Very, very attractive.
Which is great. That sounds amazing, right?
Yeah.
But they also worked 60-hour weeks for a while. Like, it's an absolute grind to get there. But if you can do that for 12 months or whatever, and then you have the opportunity to move up into a senior SDR or team lead position, where then you're responsible for other people. Obviously, there's a commensurate level of salary that gets associated with that, because then you get management experience. So you're still an SDR, but you have the opportunity to try things like manage other people, run meetings, build some reports in Salesforce, get some ops experience, whatever it might be. That's when you start to see your earning potential really increase. And then, honestly, at that point, once you matriculate out of the SDR position and you graduate out, then if you've been there for 18 months and you have all of these ancillary skills that you've built, operations people get paid a ton of money. SDR managers get paid a ton of money. AEs get paid a ton of money. So you're really sowing a lot of the future seeds that you have for your salary and comp, but you can definitely earn a crap ton of money as an SDR if you work hard.
It's great. Seems like a great entry-level opportunity if you take advantage of it the right way.
It's the best, in my opinion, the best way to introduce yourself into, I've been in SaaS my whole life.
If you want,
if you want to be in B2B SaaS, start as an SDR, because within 2 years, you could be running a team. Within 5 years, you could be heading up a whole sales function at an organization, making $400,000. Like, sky's the limit.
Love it. Love it. All right, so we don't have a ton of time to dive into this deep topic, but I have one question for you, because I've heard this debate many, many times. Where should the SDR function report into, marketing or sales?
Ooh, I like this. So I'm obviously very biased because A, we run an organization where sales development is the main focus, and B, we ran an event a couple of years ago with this in mind, the idea that sales development kind of deserves its own seat at the table, depending on the organization. If you're a mature enough company with a well-built out sales team and a well-built out marketing team, and sales development is sort of that gap, the way to bridge the gap between the two.
Right.
Having a director of sales development is a great sort of opportunity for that department to report up to its own leader and be able to help align sales and marketing on campaign efforts, on target account research, on all that stuff. I think outside of that very specific scenario where you have that type of company, if you're an organization that focuses very heavily on inbound and marketing is driving a lot of the leads, have them roll up to marketing, because more than likely sales dev is handling inbound leads, and that'll be that. If it's a company that has a much more mature sales function and you're doing a lot of outbound, have them roll up to sales. I think it depends on where you're seeing a lot of the revenue come in and where you as a company are building out most of your go-to-market strategy. Inbound marketing, outbound sales.
Great consulting answer. It depends.
Try to make everyone happy, right?
All right, AJ, what's the one thing you want the audience to take away from our conversation today?
Destroy your preconceived notions about what the SDR function looks like. I think the one thing that I want anyone to take away is whatever your view, if it's 3 years ago, if it's 5 years ago, whatever it might be, on the SDR function looks like, just reframe it to the point where you think, how can SDRs be a more strategic arm of my organization?
Love it.
That's what I want you to just noodle on based on what you've heard today and what your organization looks like. Like, where could I use this team more strategically?
Excellent takeaway. All right, now your time to shine. Where do we find you? Where do we find demandDrive? What do you want the listeners to know about AJ?
So I'm all over LinkedIn, like most sales and marketing people are at this point. I feel like that's the answer you'll probably always get if you ask someone where to find you.
Just all over it.
So you can find me on LinkedIn, AJ Alonzo. You can find demandDrive on LinkedIn, demandDrive. Where you can see us upcoming is we actually just published an ebook. I'll see if I can send it to you about some of the topics that I just talked about today.
Great.
We do a lot of content around aligning sales, marketing, hiring, getting everyone on the same page to make sure that you're all talking the same language essentially.
Yep.
You can find that at demandDrive.com, and then we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter sometimes.
What's the podcast name again?
Unsubscribe is the name of our podcast, the demandDrive podcast. Unsubscribe. For anyone who wants to get less of those nasty unsubscribe emails in their inbox, we've got guests that come on to help talk through best practices around stuff like cold email, cold calling, how to get better engagement rates with our prospecting, stuff like that. So that's at demandDrive.com/ I think just podcast. I should know my URL slugs better, right?
Get it down. All right, AJ. Thanks for doing the show. This is a great conversation.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Josh. I appreciate it.